Hello, everybody. Once again, I am Lehman Crafton, aka Zorvalachan Less Than Guru, and I want to do my third Adventure Quest Jaern review video about the setting. Also, how I took the rules for this game, Adventure Quest, and how I made it my own with my own setting, and how I like taking ideas from various places. So the first thing that I want to say is the setting is 98% water. It's a water world. It is a shallow sea that encompasses pretty much the whole planet. And that can be off-putting because I don't personally know a lot of people who like water-based games where you're on ships sailing all the time. Even in a short but good few adventures that I had playing Seventh Sea, of all things, it was mostly land-based. The ship stuff was very little in the time that we played the game. I just am not a big fan either playing on it or game mastering it. It's a little difficult and abstract in some ways. So, when I was at the fantasy club at Purdue University, as I mentioned before, with lots of game masters, a very common thing was you got your hook, you decided which game master you were going to, your characters that were in that game loaded up on a boat, your boat went to some island, you landed, you went out, you did your thing, and then you got back on your boat and you went home. And the boat was usually like X many days passes uneventfully, or maybe you might have one encounter at sea, and then you did your thing, and it was usually getting up to 12 o'clock at night when the game should end, so then everybody jumps on the boat and gets back before the next week. And then the head game master would, each game master would have a sheet of what they did and how long it took, and then the main game master would get all of those, and he would figure out how long between the last Saturday and the current Saturday, and basically he would I think they'd write up on the chalkboard what the current date was, so then you could see. And if somebody took a long amount of time, then there was ways in the game to show what you might do during those long stretches of time. You could devote it to getting experience points for advancing things that might be more difficult, like becoming a mage if you're a warrior, or becoming a devotee and a priest, type thing. So what I wanted to say was the setting was water, and I personally don't like water games. So I liked the mechanics, I liked the rules. I felt that it was at that time in the early 90s, it was something that appealed very much to me. It wasn't a level-based system. I did like Palladium, but I liked Palladium better than D&D, and I didn't like D&D very much. And this, keeping the basic core of D&D and allowing, or showing the D20s to roll, the damage was the same, the defenses were very close, that I could take a D&D adventure and just play with it on the fly without converting things really, because everything converted very, very well on its own. That I liked the system not being level based, that it was experience point based. So I made my own world. And I say made loosely because I'm inspired and I take from other sources. If it's at my own table and I don't have to worry about IP, copyright, infringement, trademark infringement, anything like that, if it's just me in my home world, I will steal and grab and pull off of anything that I can. And with this system, it's just that big binder I had, Adventure Quest Jaern, I took people through Ravenloft adventures. There's a pretty thick adventure. It was still the little, it wasn't like a big box set or big book, but it was still a pretty hefty adventure called Feast of Goblins. And I took them through that. and introduced my group to Ravenloft, not through D&D, but through Adventure Quest. Another thing, after that campaign had ended and we played other things, and I felt like bringing back Adventure Quest, that's when I made my rules of being able to energize and pull magic into you, and being able then, if you kept it in you though as a magic user, then it could start burning you from the inside. Basically, you're holding on to magic energy too long, so you'd have to flush that out. And I added skills where people could see magical flows. I kind of had a magic kind of being flow and things, and basically that concept was taking, and I wanted to share with you one of my favorite novels series. It was a trilogy, 3 novels. Black Sun Rising, C.S. Friedman. These are from True Night Falls was the second one. They're pretty hefty books. And then the last one, Crown of Swords. These influenced that game a lot. I like the idea of there being an Earth Fae. They called it the Earth Fae. It was like Earth magic. And then they had one that was dark, and then they had one that was the sun, but nobody could really control it. And then there was a water that only certain, basically it was like humans in space, science fiction, landed on a planet, and the planet's nature would sense people's fears and think that that's what people wanted, and then it would bring those fears to life. And people had to do things to kind of protect themselves against that. And one of the very first things that happened was a guy blew up the ship and basically blew up all the technology as a sacrifice to kind of tame that craziness that was killing all these colonists. And then so many either centuries or millennia passed, and then it becomes a high fantasy world. But it's based off of this sacrifice, and people who do certain sacrifices, they can control this thing. And there was a native species on this, maybe like a weasel or something, a cat weasel on this planet. And somebody was like, oh, this cat weasel thing, and here's Mars. He heard cat. Yes, I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about a cat weasel, not a cat. So these, a person basically pointed at these and said, this is like the most intelligent form on this planet, and in time it could, through evolution, become like us. Well, then people started fearing that, and then it actually made these creatures become like humans. And from a distance, they kind of look like this, and they could control the water fae, the water magic. So I took the Adventure Quest rules, and I separated magic and divine. And so I had like the human adepts and wizards. They would use these categories of spells. And then there was a religion that was very close to a Christianity type religion, but there wasn't a Jesus. It was just, or even like maybe a Jewish. There is an all-powerful, true divine type being out there. And it was basically like, since this planet makes our dreams and fears and stuff come true, maybe if we get enough people devoted to this higher being, if it doesn't exist, we will make it exist. And then I basically then took other things and said, okay, if you want to be a priest of this true religion, then these are the spells and abilities that you can get. And then warriors could be warriors, rogues could be rogues, etc. And then I took the nomad class and I changed that a little bit and made them into physical magic, because there was a thing in the series of books where they could make runes and wards and stuff. So I kind of did that. So I changed the rules. I didn't just have earth magic. Earth mages know these things. I had earth magic was powered certain ways, and there would be earthquakes, and if you had energy points into you, then it would do a lot of damage to you. And if you wanted to play something like that other race, then you used water, but then it was affected by tides that ebbed and flowed. And then there is a dark magic type thing. So I took a lot of those concepts from this series of books and used it. Now, I didn't make it this. I made it my own. I had my own continent area and populated it, and didn't go exactly how it was in these books, but I used this as really good, a really good base of what I wanted to do. And then I don't even think I took any adventures from anything. I want to say that that whole campaign, pretty much up until really close to the end, was all kind of my own creation on what was happening and what was going on, and different adventures and stuff that the party was having to deal with. And it was one thing that you did not like going out at night. If you went out at night, the ordinary person would be killed. They would be dead. Somebody's fear would come and eat them, basically. So any of the adventurers had that mentality. And like one of their early adventures was just a farmer was losing crops at night, and they were arguing over whether or not they wanted to actually be out at night. So I think they made a huge bonfire to get an area of light that they felt a little bit safer in, and things like that. And then they grew more powerful and didn't care about being out at night and stuff like that. But basically, I just wanted to say that don't be distracted by a setting of a book if the rules can be divorced from the setting. Certain ones are difficult, like Torg would be difficult if you weren't just wanting to play one genre. If you wanted to do the mixed genre, it would be kind of difficult not to have it on Earth just the way it is. You could, I'm not saying you couldn't, but then the whole aspect of it being Torg wouldn't work. But old Torg system, the basic core system in itself kind of became something similar with things like Blood Shadows, and it did become a generic one, Master Book. But I'm trying to think if there was an actual space one, and I know I said it in another video, but I can't remember it right now. But those base mechanics were turned into different games. So you could do that with even Torg, but I wouldn't call it Torg then. I would call it something else. I would use those mechanics, but I definitely wouldn't call it Torg, because Torg has that sense in my mind of all these invading realities on core Earth. And it's going to bug me, because I know as soon as I turn off this video, that name is going to come to my, it's going to pop in. Shatter Zone. So that was an outer space thing based on the core concept of Torg. I think they used 2d10 instead of 1d20, but the base was kind of there, the same. So basically, I'm not going to keep this long. I just wanted to say and use Adventure Quest Jaern as an example. If you download the PDF that I put the link in the last video, and the mechanics, and you're reading it and you're liking the mechanics, and it doesn't bother you to do math between adventures, because when you hit the adventures, there's very simple math, even more simple than any Pathfinder or D&D currently out there. Even old editions of D&D and Pathfinder, it's a little more even streamlined than that when you're in game. If you want to try that, but you start reading the setting and you don't like the settings, and you don't like the deities, and you don't like, this and that, change it completely. I use divine spells, but made it into a form of priest magic, and I didn't have a Osiris and what were some of the other ones, Neptune and Tor and other things like that. I had my own creation that I took. So as a game master, you could do that. And again, anytime you change something, just let your players know what you've changed. Write it up in a Word document, put it on Google Docs, make it into a PDF, whatever it is, distribute it to your players so they know when they're getting into the game what's going to be changed. And I think I might have had like 3 pages of just all the extra little skills that I added, what their base cost was, what attribute they were assigned to, and the skill list or the spell lists for the various spells for each of the type, whether they were sorcerer or adept, or priest of the true way, or one of the I can't even remember what I called them or what they were called in the books, but the cat weasels turned humanoid things that use the water. But yeah, I basically just made my rules, handed them out, and the setting worked very, very well. And to this day, anytime I will say, hey, does anybody want to play Adventure Quest, make some characters and do an Adventure Quest, the one thing that they all say is, if we get to use your energizing rules, if we get to use that, then we're all for it, just because they love that house rule so much. They just really like the idea of being able to cast. You have to spend your first rounds energizing yourself, filling yourself up with magical energy, but if you held it too long, then you could damage yourself, but you could keep doing that and casting more spells and more spells. So there is that risk and reward, but it isn't the X many spell units or whatever their magic points, and then you rest like spell slots. You did all your spells and your day's over and you sleep until you get new ones. You could just keep going, but you could damage yourself if there's like an earthquake happening, or if you've held it in for too long then and haven't let it out, then you can start burning yourselves. So I'll go ahead and I'll end that. Basically, again, make the game your own. It doesn't matter what the game is, what the setting is, what the mechanics are. You can always make the game for your home table your own, and it's not going to hurt anybody at all, and it's probably going to help you and your group, because you as a game master understand your group better than any game company out there, any developer out there who's looking at a overall global type scenario to introduce a game or keep a game going for. They're not necessarily focused on that individual table that you as the game master are. So I will leave you with that. If you liked it, you can hit like. If you dislike, you can hit dislike. Subscribe if you want to. And until next time, I will catch you later.